Amazon's Like a Dragon falls prey to the very same pitfalls that plague a majority of every other video game adaptation, and that is dunking on the source material. To this day, I do not understand why this happens. It's almost as if the arrogant showrunners and writers hate the source material and perceive it to be beneath them, and in a pathetic attempt to feed their egos, they completely warp the original artist's creation into an unrecognizable abomination. That's what Amazon's Like a Dragon is to me. One of the things that contributed to the smash hit that was The Last of Us by HBO is that it took the original story and converted it into a television series, pretty much verbatim. The biggest red flag of Like a Dragon before this show was even out was the actors admitting that they never even played the games, which is ridiculous. Even Cate Blanchett for the Borderlands film at least bothered playing the games, and yet they couldn't even be bothered to do so? Watching this show, I wasn't even sure if the writers had played the games, and had simply just received a bullet point list of events that they had to adapt for a live-action adaptation of Yakuza. There are so many changes to the story and characters that are just plain outrageous, and the casting choices for so many of these iconic characters is outright insulting. The show takes place across two different time periods, 1995 and 2005. On a surface level, they might trick you into thinking that this is them being faithful to the timeline of the video games, but this is a lie. What they have done is essentially create their own timeline of events in an oddly jumbled up manner. Kazuma Kiryu in this show is no longer born in 1968, but is instead born either in the late 70s or early 80s. And this change is detrimental to his character, which I will explain later. I just don't understand why they chose to retain the setting of the original game, while completely changing not only the entire backstory of these characters, but also changing major events that led to these characters becoming who they are, rendering these characters completely unrecognizable from their video game counterparts. The show opens up with a scene of Kiryu training in prison, followed by a flashback to an arena fight, which is presumably of Kiryu fighting in the arena. And then we go back to 1995, and this is a recurring pattern in the show, where the series constantly jumps between these two time periods, which in my opinion completely upsets the pace of the story. Because when you play the first Yakuza game, you weren't hopping time periods every chapter. Back in 1995, Kiryu is off to Kamurocho, preparing to rob an arcade with three of his friends, Akira Nishikiyama, Yumi Sawamura, and Miho Nishikiyama. Why the name change? Would it hurt these writers to maintain some semblance of continuity? Honestly, this entire scenario is pretty suspect to me, and caused me to raise a few eyebrows. Why on earth are Miho and Yumi helping Kiryu and Nishiki out with their criminal activities? This just doesn't make any sense within the context of the established canon of the Yakuza games. When you compare the video game counterparts of these characters to their live-action counterparts, it just seems ridiculously out of character for Yumi and Miho to partake in mischief. Their newfound roles in supporting Kiryu and Nishiki's criminal activities just makes me suspicious over Amazon's intentions behind this script. I don't know, it's almost as if they were forcing some kind of agenda into another artist's work, maybe? Anyway, after robbing the arcade, they drive back to the orphanage, where they celebrate their newfound independence from Kazuma. Shintaro is busy watching a Toshiro Mifune film, on TV I guess. The next day, Kiryu is cleaning up a pigsty. Oh wow, how ironic. Sums up the show in a nutshell, only for a bunch of Yakuza to show up, asking about the money they stole. It is revealed that the arcade they robbed belonged to the Dojima family, and it is here where Kazuma Shintaro steps in to stop the Yakuza from harming Nishiki. After they recognize him as Kazuma Shintaro, they take him and the four back to Dojima HQ, where it is revealed that Kazuma is a former member of the Dojima family? Hold on, what? Kazuma Shintaro by 1995 in the timeline of the games was the de facto leader of the Dojima family, whereas Dojima Sohei himself was just a figurehead by that point. Why on earth would Kazuma Shintaro quit the Yakuza and move into the orphanage? This is so out of character, and this will be a recurring pattern for many characters to follow. It is here where Dojima Sohei is introduced. who also completely differs from his in-game counterpart. This version of Dojima is apparently also an orphan, like Kiryu and Nishiki. Now, I don't know why they made this change. Perhaps they wanted to create a stronger dynamic between the characters, a weird change. I don't mind it too much. So anyway, Kiryu quickly realizes that Dojima plans to kill all four of them in retaliation for robbing the arcade, causing Dojima to lose face. Kiryu suddenly kowtows to Dojima, claiming that he planned the robbery as a means of showcasing his talents to Dojima, wishing to join the Dojima family. Let the character assassinations begin. Now in the games, Kiryu didn't just join the Yakuza for the heck of it. Kiryu was inspired to join the Yakuza through the actions of Kazama Shintaro, who he viewed as a perfect man with a heart of gold. His point of view about the Yakuza mirrors a viewpoint many civilians had in the post-World War II era of Japan, where the Yakuza were seen as figures that represented honor, who helped Japan recover from the aftermath of World War II. During this time period, the Yakuza would also help out civilians with their problems, offering protection as well as services akin to law enforcement, becoming effectively a functional piece of society that greatly helped with the rebuilding efforts of Japan. The entire point of Kiryu's story was to join the Yakuza with this romanticized fantasy about the Yakuza world, only for it to be shattered, and show him how much the values of the Yakuza were warped over time, and that the Yakuza world is no longer how it was during Kazama Shintaro's era. And this is where I will address a point I brought up during the premise section, which is the change of time periods. Kazuma Kiryu in the Yakuza games grew up in the 60s and 70s, which, as I mentioned earlier, was a period when Japan rebuilt itself in the aftermath of World War II. Growing up in the 70s, Kiryu would no doubt idolize men like Kazama, which greatly impacted his worldview, which would be shattered by the time he joined the Yakuza during the bubble era of Japan in the 1980s. In the history of Japan, this was a time period when material wealth basically superseded honor and code of conduct, thus warping the Yakuza into a purely criminal enterprise. So this change in timeline has also resulted in a change of events that led towards Kiryu joining the Yakuza. Now instead of joining the Yakuza to be a man of honor, it seems as if Kiryu is just some punk off the streets that wants to join the Yakuza for money and power. It is in this scene where Kiryu also tells Dojima of his desire to become the Dragon of Dojima after he was inspired watching the original Dragon of Dojima fighting in the ring all those years ago? Hold on, what? So it is revealed that the kid in the flashback sequence during the beginning of the show was actually Kiryu himself, which is honestly one of the most baffling changes they've made to the story. First of all, Kazuma Kiryu is the one and only Dragon of Dojima. The Dragon of Dojima isn't some title that gets passed around from one person to another. It was a symbol of his reputation during the apex of his Yakuza days, working as a Dojima family enforcer. But now for some reason the Dragon of Dojima is some legendary mythical inspirational figure, implying that Kiryu was never the original Dragon of Dojima, and that he simply Rey Skywalkered it from another guy. This is insane. This character assassination just gets worse by the minute. Now, at the time of this recording, it is unknown who this dragon was, and I'm theorizing that this Dragon of Dojima will be revealed to be Kazama Shintaro, which is just a rough attempt of mine to connect the dots. The show implies that the Dragon of Dojima was an enforcer of Dojima in the past, and Kazama Shintaro is a retired Yakuza, so it's most likely him, but take this with a grain of salt. Plus, in the games, Kazama was basically Dojima's #1 hitman, so it makes sense for them to retrofit him into the shoes of the original Dragon of Dojima. Anyway, after a failed attempt by Kazama to parlay with Dojima, Kiryu asks Dojima to enlist him as a contender in an arena fight where he can prove his worth. This enrages Kazama, who in the next scene explains to Kiryu about the toll this way of life exacts on those that partake in it. Sort of a foreshadowing moment towards the decades of suffering that Kiryu will eventually face as a result of his decision to join the Yakuza. Now, back in 2005, Kiryu is finally released from prison and is told by Date about the 10 billion yen incident, which differs greatly in the show. The money is no longer Kyohei Jingu's or the Tojo clan's, but now it belongs to the Omi Alliance. Wasn't the whole point of the 10 billion yen incident in the original game to show the possibility of corrupt politicians with ties to the Yakuza infiltrating the Diet, aka the Japanese government? Kyohei Jingu has basically been completely removed from the storyline as a result of this change, and so it is revealed that the person who stole the Omi's 10 billion is Yumi's sister Aiko? You mean Mizuki? But wait, Mizuki never existed in the original storyline. It was revealed to be Yumi all along. But in this show, Yumi actually has a sister. How absurd can you get with these changes? And while we're on this topic, let's talk about Yumi. This portrayal of Yumi is completely insufferable. I hated every second of her on screen. And this Yumi is nothing like the Yumi from the games. This version of Yumi is more boring, annoying, and outspoken, as opposed to her video game counterpart. In the original story, she was more reserved and innocent, caught in the crossfires of Kiryu and Nishiki's criminal lifestyle. She was an innocent victim of the harshness of the Yakuza world, and a big part of her character was to recover from the damage the Yakuza world inflicted upon her, resulting in her amnesia. But here she's a stone-cold killer, murdering people, taking names, and taking an active role in the action alongside Kiryu himself. Another drastic change to the premise is that there's a serial killer on loose in Kamurocho, which seems to be a plot element they took from Judgment. It's bizarre how these writers already struggled so hard adapting the self-contained story of the first game, but now they want to merge in elements from the entire series. All they did was bite off more than they could chew. And this is not the only time they took something from a future installment. The entire premise surrounding the Millennium Tower's construction in 1995 seems to have been lifted straight from Yakuza 0, where there's an owner of an empty lot who Dojima needs the lease off of. It is during a 1995 flashback that we see another character they completely destroyed. While Kiryu and Nishiki are performing chores for Dojima, one of the Dojima family enforcers walks in to check in on them. And this enforcer is revealed to be Keiji Shibusawa.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that?
Yes, the Shibusawa. That looks nothing like him. Why is he so short? Why couldn't they just get Hideo Nakano to reprise his role? It's an absolute no-brainer. He did the facial capture and mocap anyway, so it just boggles my mind why they couldn't have just reused the original actors for a handful of roles. It could have been the ultimate opportunity to deliver some truly epic fan service moments by literally having the original actors reprise their roles but in a live-action space. A lot like how Kevin Conroy played a live-action version of Batman. Anyway, Dojima tries to acquire the deed to the empty lot from this foreign businessman named Edgar Beale that possesses it. But this does not work, because he claims that he does not trust a criminal like Dojima. So Dojima gets Kiryu, Nishiki, and Shibusawa to steal a deed from his office above the Maharaja Disco Club. Okay, I'm honestly surprised that they retained something from the games. So anyway, in the midst of all this, it is revealed that Kazama Shintaro has ties to Beale and is trying to make sure that Dojima does not get his hands on the land, which is very reminiscent of his actual role in Yakuza 0, where he had been working with Tachibana to ensure the empty lot does not fall into Dojima's possession. Meanwhile, Kiryu's search for the deed is successful, but they're missing a crucial piece, the seal which they need to make the paperwork official. Turns out, during his meeting with Kazama Shintaro, he entrusts his seal to his sister, whose name I cannot recall for the life of me, so I will just refer to her as Beale's sister. So after she receives the seal from Beale, she later goes into hiding. Since the robbery was a botched job, Kiryu and Nishiki are reprimanded by Dojima, after which they exit Dojima's office and run into two well-known characters from the series, Majima and Saejima? I have so many questions about this entire scenario. Why is Saejima even here? Shouldn't he be in prison after assassinating 18 guys in the Ueno hit back in 1985? Why is Saejima so short? He looks like a low-level gangster, a literal chimpira. And this brings me to a massive bone I have to pick with the show. Why couldn't they get any of the actors to resemble the characters they played? Hell, why couldn't they get any actors that actually looked like the characters they're supposed to portray? Apart from another character that is introduced later on, Majima is probably the only character in the show that somewhat resembles his game counterpart. What an absolute joke. Due to the botched job, Shibusawa assumes the seal is in Edgar's possession, so he walks into the Maharaja Disco Club and stabs him to death, which results in a televised arrest of his being broadcasted later. But little did he know the seal wasn't on him in the first place. Naturally, the Dojima family expels Shibusawa after this, and this causes Nishiki to believe the same thing will happen to them if they do not deliver the seal. So this gives Kiryu and Nishiki some motivation to find the seal in order to gain Dojima's favor. Now back in 2005, Akio is hanging out in a manga cafe with her daughter Haruka, who finally makes an appearance, but not in the way you would have expected. Haruka pesters Akio for donuts, forcing her to step out of the cafe for a minute, and then armed goons enter the cafe and start killing everyone in an attempt to kidnap Haruka. Haruka is rescued by Kiryu and brought to Yumi, who for some reason is running her own hostess bar, which I'm assuming is Ares from the game. Now it is in this scene where they butcher one of the best scenes from the game, which is Kiryu's reunion with Yumi. In the original game, this was long overdue. Kiryu had spent 10 years wondering if he would ever reunite with his childhood friend, and when he finally does, it is a scene that holds a lot of weight. But in the show literally brushes it off like it was nothing. Kiryu and Yumi in the show seem like they have zero chemistry whatsoever. They don't even act like they've known each other for so many years. They act like indifferent strangers around each other. Anyway, in the next scene, he also has a reunion with Nishiki, which again just completely falls flat on its face. For some reason, Kiryu and Nishiki pledge to work together in finding the 10 billion yen, which makes no sense. In the game, Nishiki had bad intentions for looking for Haruka and the 10 billion, which was further exacerbated by the fact that Nishiki was the one who shot Kazama during the third chairman's funeral, which for Kiryu was the point of no return. Now that is an event that does not occur in this show, but despite the event not occurring, Kiryu has no reason to trust Nishiki, especially after the fact Nishiki betrayed a promise they made when they first joined the Yakuza, which was to never take a life. So any way you put it, Kiryu would not trust Nishiki. Now, back in 1995, Kiryu and Nishiki are looking for Beale's sister to retrieve the seal, and after tracking her to a local hotel, they are blindsided by not Saejima and Majima, who cause a commotion inside the hotel, alerting Beale's sister, who flees the hotel, and a chase ensues. During the chase sequence, she pulls out a gun and shoots Saejima, who dies from a gunshot wound. What? I have nothing more to say about that. Rest in peace, not Saejima. Kiryu and Nishiki take the gun from her, and then, in an effort to manipulate her, claim that they are with Kazama and are here to help her. So they drag her off to an abandoned building where Majima corners them and has a long anticipated fight with Kiryu. This is where I have to highlight another disservice they performed to the Yakuza series with this show. The Yakuza series is known for adrenaline-induced boss fights that make you want to scream and rip your shirt off. The premise of the boss fight, combined with the sublime music and the dynamic boss intros, just invokes a feeling that has become a signature, a staple of the series. Except over here, they completely butcher one of the best aspects of a Yakuza game by having not just terrible fight choreography, but also forgettable music and a lack of effort in recreating the gameplay experience and translating it into another media format. Now, on a bit of a side note here, one of the reasons I love the John Wick films so much is how it perfectly encapsulates the video game experience onto the silver screen. These films perfectly capture the feel of playing an adrenaline-induced third-person shooter like Max Payne into the format of a film. Even the way the action sequences are structured in a John Wick film is like that of a video game level. If anything, John Wick combines elements I felt that were present in Yakuza games, such as the killer boss fights, and the long battles with Max Payne's intense gunfights, which in turn were influenced by John Woo's immaculate action sequences in films like A Better Tomorrow, Hard Boiled, and The Killer. Similar to the Yakuza games, there are boss fights in a John Wick film that come with the Yakuza series trademark burst of adrenaline you feel at the beginning of a combat encounter, which is perfectly captured in the John Wick films. And that to me is the appeal of John Wick. They capture what is essentially the essence of a video game and translate it into a different medium entirely. But this show fails where John Wick succeeded. The fight scenes in this show are just awful. Majima and Kiryu. This is a pivotal moment where a rivalry between these two is established and communicated to the audience. But all that happens is Nishiki distracts Majima, who's just mildly annoyed by this, and then ragdolls him around, and it is here where the show also does disservice to Nishiki. Nishiki was always a capable fighter. He was nowhere near Kiryu's level, but he was always highly capable of supporting Kiryu in a fight, as evident by Yakuza 0. And yet over here, Majima just treats him like he's some punk kid. I mean, do I need to remind you that Nishiki literally faced off Majima in Yakuza 0, and while Majima was able to easily beat him, it was still a good fight, you know? It was a solid boss fight. So anyway, Nishiki manages to distract Majima long enough for Kiryu to knock him out. Nishiki, after having just pointed a gun at Majima, completely loses it and starts threatening Beale's sister, demanding the seal. But then Kiryu stops him and reminds him that they didn't join the Yakuza to kill people, and decide to walk away. And later a police officer shows up and arrests Beale's sister, confiscating the seal, which he later delivers to Dojima. And then in one of the most contrived conversations ever, Dojima suddenly draws a comparison between the corrupt officer's deeds with that of the ferryman of the Sanzu River, aka the River Styx, if you're more familiar with Greek mythology, giving him the name Florist of Sai, revealing that this police officer is the Florist of Sai. This is basically the only character in the entire show that actually resembles his video game counterpart. Meanwhile, in the aftermath of the public shooting, where Saejima got killed, results in Dojima losing his investors for the Millennium Tower project, which is then followed by Dojima lashing out on Majima for screwing up and gouging his eye out. Yes, Majima's loss of his eye, which was his symbol of undying loyalty towards his brother Saejima, is now no longer a symbol of his tenacity, but rather a symbol of his loss because he screwed up. If this isn't character assassination, I don't know what is. Back in 2005, Kiryu and Yumi sought out the Florist of Sai's assistance in searching for the 10 billion yen and Aiko. What confuses me about the Florist's operations in this show is that his operations are based inside the Millennium Tower rather than the underground purgatory in Kamurocho's West Park. I mean, he shouldn't even be here until Yakuza 2, but whatever. It's not like the writers care anyway, so why should I? The Florist helps them out in exchange for an arena fight from Kiryu, which never happens. And he reveals to them that Aiko is still hanging out with a guy she dated back in Osaka. And so they go on their way to Osaka. As you can see, this show does not respect the source material at all. This show is definitely not going to enhance the popularity of the Like a Dragon brand, and nor is it going to bring truckloads of new people into the fandom, like the Fallout show did. This show will be forgotten and cancelled soon enough. Don't kid yourself into thinking Amazon's going to order a second season of this filth. This show was just painful to watch, and I don't know if I can take any more of this. 3 episodes is all I could take before giving up on it entirely. It is a complete assassination of the story, written by a couple of clowns that probably never played the games, and it shows. The character changes, the changes in the story, the way the characters act, look, and behave, it is nothing like the video games. And the worst part is, Masayoshi Yokoyama, who is the head of RGG Studios, And the writer for most of these games was actually a part of this show's production. How could he have allowed this show to happen? He is credited as an executive producer for this show. And I understand that executive producers don't have that much say in what goes into the final product, but he still could have done something. I literally can't believe I'm saying this, but I think Takashi Miike's 2007 adaptation of Like a Dragon might actually be better than this. And even that was a terrible adaptation. But at least the Miike film got the casting right. Hazuki Kitamura could have actually been great as Kazuma Kiryu if he had worked with a better script. If you don't believe me, I recommend watching the TV show Neko Samurai. Perhaps that will convince you how much potential his Kiryu had. And Goro Kishitani was just perfect as Majima. Far better than what we got here. Now, I don't know if I will review the remaining 3 episodes. Maybe I will, or maybe I won't. Who knows? Thank you for watching.
まだ終わって